Nobody likes being patronised. When you play a game and there's constantly tooltips popping up on the screen, the game pauses as you're forced to read more tutorial. The game's mechanics are taught to you in the least subtle way possible. Now don't get me wrong, there's no problem with bringing text up on the screen to convey a message to the player. Sometimes there's no real way around it. Like some ideas are far too complex to convey to the player without text on the screen. But where it can be avoided, it should be avoided. Nothing ruins your immersion in a game like a giant text box appearing in your face. Game designers have come up with clever ways to avoid breaking your immersion with tutorials. Take a look at this example from Half-Life 2. These enemies are called barnacles. If they grab you with their tongue, they ensnare you and try to eat you. But instead of a giant text bubble appearing on the screen to tell you this, it just shows you. This is how you're first introduced to the barnacles. Another game that perfected the technique of subtle tutorials is Celeste. Celeste likes to show instead of tell. Every single chapter introduces you to a new mechanic, and it will make sure to show you how the mechanics work before raising the difficulty. Take the traffic light blocks in Forsaken City. The block just looks like a strange looking platform, and the only way to reach the exit of this room is by standing on it. When you do stand on it, it quickly slides across its rails. This instantly shows new players what the blocks do completely unambiguously. Few new players will be confused about what just happened. There are also these spikes on this right wall. If a player jumps as the block moves, they'll hit the spikes and die, quickly teaching them about how the blocks maintain your momentum. In Celeste, death doesn't mean much. You respawn moments later to retry the room after you die, so the game teaching you how something works by killing you with spikes isn't such a big deal. Most difficult platformers will take a similar approach. If the game expects you to die often, they won't make respawn timers very long, and they won't be afraid to use death as a learning experience. A similar strategy is used in Chapter 5, the Mirror Temple, where there's these platforms. When you dash, they move across their rails at high speed. The first time you see them is here, and the average player is going to dash to cross this little gap here. When they do, the block will hastily move out of their way, instantly teaching them how these blocks function. The room is completely void of all danger, giving you a safe space to play around with the new mechanic. There's also these red bubbles in Chapter 5, but they work in a similar way to bubbles previously seen in Chapter 4, so the player should be somewhat familiar with the way they work. But despite that, the game still shows you the red bubbles in a fairly simple and safe environment. Celeste doesn't always use this strategy though. Very occasionally, a raven will appear and do something like this. Like I said before, some concepts are way too complex to convey to the player during gameplay, but even when Celeste can't teach through gameplay, it makes the hint as non-intrusive as possible. It doesn't halt gameplay and it doesn't slow you down. Believe it or not, tutorials do not need to be extremely in-depth and detailed. As long as the tutorial serves the game's needs, it can be as detailed or as vague as the developer chooses. But Celeste manages to create a simple and wordless tutorial that is also very informative at the same time. If a game wants to be vague, however, it can be. I went into much more detail about this in my video about Rain World, link down below. Game devs need to be careful with tutorials. Be too vague and you alienate a lot of your audience, but hold the player's hand too much and they get turned off of playing your game. Celeste teaches its players in the most organic way possible. Sure, some games are way too big and way too complex to use this same strategy, and that's a reasonable argument, but there are also many games that hold your hand far too much. Let's hope that more game developers start being creative with teaching the players their game mechanics in future. Thanks for watching.